Hello and welcome back to Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. Today we begin Rule 3. Make friends with people who want the best for you. This piece of advice is something I taught my children from the time they were very young. In the Bible, it says, to be wise, walk with wise men. And in the Bible, it says, the companion of fools will suffer. So we want to choose our friends very carefully. Let's see what Jordan Peterson has to say. The first paragraph is very long. I'll show you. This entire page is all pretty much one section, and the main idea is that his hometown, the place he was born, is very cold and there's nothing to do. Let's pause. I want to stop it for a second. Should I say finish or?
No, leave it.
Are you sure?
You can cut before.
Okay.
After that.
Could you look up how many degrees Celsius is 40 below 0 Fahrenheit?
Mm-hmm.
I meant to look that up.
Mm-hmm.
Degrees below 0.
It's the same. 40 Celsius. For some reason, I think under
I'm
0.
sure it can't be the same. That's not possible.
Yeah. What is that? Let's try another calculator.
It still says it's the same.
Yeah. But why? 32 Fahrenheit, 0 Celsius.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
There's no way it's the same.
Yeah.
Try 100 degrees below 0. And I mean, maybe 40 is like the sweet spot where they're the same.
73 Celsius. Oh, it's I think it's a coincidence.
It's just a coincidence.
Yeah. If it's 41, it's not the same.
Huh.
Only 40 is the same.
That is funny. Okay, we'll tell everybody that. Okay, so we are starting now from 4 minutes and 30 seconds ish.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll cut off the first 4 minutes and 30 seconds approximately.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Hello and welcome back to Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. Today we will begin rule number 3. Make friends with people who want the best for you. This is a rule that I taught my children very young. It says in the Bible, if you want to be wise, you should walk with wise men. It also says, the companion of fools will suffer. So it is important to choose your friends very carefully. Let's see what Jordan Peterson has to say about this topic. His first section talks about his hometown, the place he was born and raised from a child. Let us read. The town I grew up in had been scraped only 50 years earlier out of the endless flat northern prairie. Scraped out of the endless flat northern prairie. Scraped out means the prairie was grass and snow and rocks, and they had to move everything to build this town. This is an image, a metaphor of wilderness. Scraped out. To scrape is to do this. Fairview, Alberta, which is in Canada, was part of the frontier and had the cowboy bars to prove it. Cowboy bars. A bar is where you get alcohol, and the cowboys come in with their hats and shoot 'em up. Cowboy bars, to show that it was part of the frontier. The Hudson Bay Company department store on Main Street still bought beaver, wolf, and coyote furs directly from the local trappers. 3,000 people lived there, 400 miles away from the nearest city. Cable TV, video games, and internet did not exist. This was the 1970s. It was no easy matter to stay innocently amused in Fairview. No easy matter is a phrase which means simply it was not easy. It was difficult to stay innocently amused, in other words, to have fun without doing bad things, to have fun innocently. In Fairview, particularly during the 5 months of winter, when long stretches of 40 below days, and even colder nights were the norm. The norm means normal. And 40 below means 40 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. By coincidence, 40 degrees Fahrenheit is the same as 40 degrees centigrade. If you have 41 degrees Fahrenheit, it will no longer be exactly the same in centigrade. But at that point, 40 below, the two ways of measuring temperature overlap. So 40 below, centigrade or Fahrenheit, they're the same. So it was 40 below during the day and even colder at night. The world is a different place when it's cold like that. The drunks in our town ended their sad lives early. They passed out in snowbanks. Passed out means became unconscious. At 3 in the morning and froze to death. You don't go outside casually when it is 40 below. On first breath, the arid desert air, very dry, arid, desert air constricts your lungs. Ice, and get my pronunciation of the word ice. Ice forms on your eyelashes and they stick together. Long hair, wet from the shower, freezes solid, and then stands on end, wraith-like, of its own accord. Of its own accord means by itself, without anyone touching it. It stands on end in a warm house. When it thaws, bone dry. Bone dry is a phrase we use for absolutely dry, very dry, no moisture at all. So your hair, you take a shower, it's all wet, and you go outside in 40 below and your hair freezes. But the water goes away because the air is dry. And when you come back in, your hair thaws, but it's bone dry and it stands up with static electricity. Children only put their tongues on steel playground equipment once. Only once. So they only do it once. Those two words go together, only and once. Smoke from house chimneys doesn't rise. Smoke doesn't rise. Defeated by the cold, it drifts downward. Drifts downward. And collects like fog on snow-covered rooftops and yards. So if a person has a fire in their house, the smoke goes out the chimney and then comes down and stays on the roof and falls off to the ground like a mist, like fog. Smoke does not rise. Cars must be plugged in at night. There are many couples, many pairs of words in this section that I'm pointing out. Words that must go together. So plugged in is one of them. And if you take a cord and a socket in the wall for electricity and you plug it in, you need both words. Cars must be plugged in at night. Their engines warmed by block heaters, or oil will not flow through the engine in the morning, and they won't start. Cars will not start unless you plug them in at night and keep a heater going in the engine. Sometimes they won't start anyway. Even if you plug them in, they still won't start. And then you turn the engine over, So this is two words that must go together. Turn over. When the mechanic wants you to start your car, he says, turn it over, turn over. The engine, if it won't turn over, it's dead. So then you turn the engine over pointlessly until the starter clatters and falls silent. Then you remove the frozen battery from the car, loosening bolts with stiff fingers, so cold, and bring it into the house. Bring your battery into the house. It sits there in the house, sweating for hours. You know, sweat is when water comes out because you're hot. The battery sweats because it's cold, and in the warm house, moisture forms on it. This takes hours. You will be late to work if this happens. Sweating for hours until it warms enough to hold a decent charge. You are not going to see out the back window of your car either. You will never see for all of winter out your rear view window. It frosts over. Here's another two words, frost over. It frosts over in November and stays that way. That's a good phrase. It stays that way until May. Scraping it off, remember we had that scrape off, scraping it off just dampens the upholstery. So you scrape frost off the window and it goes onto your seat and makes the seat wet, and then more frost immediately, the whole winter long. Then it's frozen too. It meaning the upholstery, the seat is frozen too. Late one night, going to visit a friend, I sat for 2 hours on the edge of the passenger seat in a 1970 Dodge Challenger. Jammed up, here's another, jammed up against the stick shift. So jammed up. If you just say jammed, it wouldn't work. You're jammed up against the stick shift. You could say jammed against. But anyway, jammed up against the stick shift using a vodka-soaked rag to keep the inside of the front windshield clear in front of the driver because the car heater had quit. So they are driving in 40 degree below weather with no heater, and the front windshield is frosting over, so you can't see out of it. Stopping wasn't an option. When something isn't an option, you cannot do it. Stopping wasn't an option because there was nowhere to stop. This is where Jordan Peterson grew up, on the prairie in Canada. And it was hell on house cats. That's a good phrase. It was hell on. If you say hell on something, that means it was bad for that entity, that person, that animal. If you just say it was hell, you mean generally conditions were bad. So if I say it was hell on me, it means only I am unhappy. It was hell in general, means everybody is unhappy. So it was hell on house cats. House cats had a bad time in this area. Felines, that means cats, in Fairview had short ears and short tails. So short goes with ears and tails, because they had lost the tip. The tip is the top. The tips of both ears and tail to frostbite. Frostbite is when your skin or your fingers or your nose, some exposed part of your body freezes and then it dies. And that part of your body, you may have to chop it off to prevent gangrene. You have just a little bit dead on your body, and the rest of your body is alive. This is bad. So, frostbite. They, meaning cats, came to resemble, to look like, Arctic foxes, which evolved those features, pointy ears, short ears, short tails. They evolved those features to deal proactively with the intense cold. So cats began to look like Arctic foxes, which evolutionarily are adapted to very cold weather. One day, our cat, Jordan Peterson's cat, got outside. So he went out, he let himself out, and no one noticed. We found him later, fur frozen fast. Here's 2 words that you need. Frozen would mean frozen. Frozen fast means attached by freezing. So the bond is by freezing. He was made fast, that means connected by the cold. So he was frozen fast. It doesn't mean quickly frozen. It means attached. He was frozen fast to the cold, hard back door cement steps where he sat. So the cat was not frozen, but he could not move because his butt was attached fast, held fast by the cold. We carefully separated cat from concrete. That must have been very painful, with no lasting damage except to his pride. So he was embarrassed. The cat was very embarrassed. Fairview cats were also at great risk. At great risk. If something is at risk, it means he is in danger. At great risk means in a lot of danger. So, cats in Fairview were in danger, at great risk, in the winter, from cars. You should notice these prepositions. At risk from what? From cars. So, the cars are the risk, the danger. But not for the reasons you think. Maybe you think the car is going to slide on the ice and hit the cat. That's not it. It wasn't automobiles sliding on icy roads and running them over. So if you run over something, that's a 2-word verb. Run over. And we put the pronoun in the middle. Run them over. You must have the over even at the end of the sentence. So over is not a preposition. It is a part of the verb. It's a two-part verb. So the problem is not automobiles sliding on icy roads and running them over. Only loser cats died. That's how you pronounce it, loser. Only loser cats, cats who are stupid and worthless. Only loser cats died that way, by being run over. It was cars parked immediately after being driven that were dangerous. Cars parked immediately after being driven that were dangerous. Because immediately after driving, the car is warm. It is hot. And the cat is looking for heat. So the cat goes under the car and jumps in to the engine compartment to get the warmth. And then maybe the person comes back and turns over the engine, vroom, and the cat is killed. So let's read this. It was cars parked immediately after being driven that were dangerous. A frigid cat, that means a very cold, frigid means very cold, cat, might think highly of climbing up under such a vehicle. Think highly of. That is a phrase that means admire. Like I could say, I think highly of George Washington. I admire him. I think he was a good man. In this case, he thinks highly of the idea of climbing into the engine compartment. He thinks it's a good idea. Okay, so these cats, a cold cat, frigid, might think highly of climbing up. And here we have it again, climbing up under such a vehicle. You notice up is part of climbing. It's not really the preposition because under is the preposition. Climb up. Climbing up under such a vehicle and sitting on its still warm engine block. But what if the driver decided to use the car again before the engine cooled down and the cat departed? Let's just say that heat-seeking house pets and rapidly rotating radiator fans do not coexist happily. So a cat in an engine compartment when the engine is turned on is a bad idea. Because we were so far north, the bitterly cold winters were also very dark. By December, the sun didn't rise until 9:30 a.m. I remember, by the way, when my kids were in teenagers, the age to be in high school, if I were driving in the early morning, I would see teenagers at 7:30 in the morning literally laying on the sidewalk waiting for their school bus in the dark before dawn. It was very sad for them. So we trudged to school in the pitch black. Trudged is a type of walking. It's heavy. and slow and deliberate. No joy, no skipping, no happiness, just duty. We trudged to school in the pitch black. They could say in the dark, but pitch black is a way of making it vivid. Pitch black is so dark that you cannot see the hand in front of your face. So this is probably an exaggeration. Maybe there were stars. Maybe it wasn't pitch black, but he remembers it as being so dark. We trudged to school in the pitch black. It wasn't much lighter when we walked home from school, just before the early sunset. So they went to school in the dark and they came home just before dark. There wasn't much for young people to do in Fairview. Even in the summer, nothing for young people to do. But winters were worse than summer. And then your friends mattered more than anything. That means they were the most important thing to you, having friends. So, this entire segment talks about the hometown of Jordan Peterson and how cold it was and that there is nothing for a teenager to do. Now we will move on to another experience of Jordan Peterson having to do with his friend Chris and the friend's Chris's cousin. I had a friend at that time. We'll call him Chris. Now, we'll call him is a literary device to tell you directly that his name is not Chris. When they say we'll call him Chris, it means I am changing the name to conceal his true identity. We'll call him Chris. He was a smart guy. He read a lot. He liked science fiction. By the way, science fiction has to go together. He didn't like science. He didn't like fiction. He liked science fiction of the kind I was attracted to. Ray Bradbury is an author. Heinlein is an author. Clark, authors that Jordan Peterson and Chris liked to read. He was inventive, meaning he had ideas that were new, original. He was interested in electronic kits and gears and motors. He was a natural engineer. Natural means he was born to be an engineer. He didn't have to learn. It was an innate talent. All this was overshadowed, however, by something that had gone wrong in his family. I don't know what it was. Something went wrong. His sisters were smart. His father was soft-spoken, so he didn't scream and yell. He was a quiet man. And his mother was kind. So you would think Chris would be in a happy home. The girls seemed okay. Seemed means I'm not sure, but to appearances, they didn't seem crazy or unhappy. But Chris had been left unattended to. Okay, so this is another one of those unattended to. If I'm going to attend to something, he was not attended to. So they did not take care of him in some important way. Despite his intelligence and curiosity, he was angry. So we think about this word here, despite. It means the first phrase gives you an expectation which the second phrase does not fulfill. So he had intelligence, curiosity. You would think he would be happy, but no, he was angry, resentful, and without hope. So that's Chris. Angry, resentful, and without hope for some reason. All this manifested itself in material form in the shape of his 1972 blue Ford pickup truck. So all of this refers to his anger, his resentment, and his hopelessness. And it made itself visible, manifested itself, made visible in a truck. The truck was the symbol of his anger and his hopelessness. That notorious vehicle, notorious means it was well known and famous. Everybody knew about this truck for bad reasons. Notorious, we speak of notorious criminals, bad people. Notorious, it's always something bad. You're not notorious for something good. So, but not seriously evil, just negative. So, the notorious vehicle, the truck, had at least one dent in every quarter panel of its damaged external body. At least means one is the least amount. Probably it has more than one, but there's no panel that doesn't have at least one. It will have one or more. That's what at least means. At least and then a number. Worse, it had an equivalent number of dents. A dent is a broken spot. It had an equivalent number of dents inside the cab. Those were produced by the impact of the body parts of friends against the internal surfaces during the continual accidents that resulted in the outer dents. Every time the car got a dent, inside it also got a dent from a friend's body. Chris's truck was the exoskeleton of a nihilist. Get my pronunciation of nihilist. Here's the word. And the exoskeleton is the hard shell of an insect, for example. So this truck was the hard shell of Chris, who was at the wheel, driving through the world, hitting things and damaging things and damaging his own friends and risking himself because he was a nihilist, a person who has no hope. It had the perfect bumper sticker, "Be alert." The world needs more alerts. This is a pun. A pun is a kind of joke that turns on the sound of the word. Alert means awake and aware and engaged. And then it says the world needs more alerts. There's no such thing as alert. So this is kind of a meaningless bumper sticker. And it's a joke. The irony it produced, in combination with the dents, elevated it nicely to the theater of the absurd. It is always interesting to try to identify what it means. The irony it produced, in combination with the dents, I think it was the bumper sticker. So the irony the bumper sticker produced, when put together with all the dents in the car, elevated it, again, and I would say elevated the situation, the car, the boy, the whole situation, nicely to the theater of the absurd. Theater of the absurd is simply saying it's just stupid. It's just crazy. It's unreal. It doesn't belong in reality. It's not rational. Very little of that was, so to speak, accidental. So again, that. Very little of that. What? Very little of the irony was accidental. So this statement is saying Chris did all this on purpose in order to make a statement to the world and to his parents, I am hopeless. But this phrase, so to speak, pulls it all back and weakens the statement. So if you take this sentence by itself, it means the irony was not accidental. He intended to make a statement. But then Jordan Peterson says it was kind of subconscious. So he uses the phrase, so to speak, in order to make the whole thing less strong. That's the function of that phrase. Every time Chris crashed his truck, his father would fix it and buy him something else. That sounds pretty good to me. Doesn't that sound good to you? Let's read on. Chris had a motorbike and a van for selling ice cream. Hold on. Let me find this part. So he crashed his truck and his father fixed it and gave him a motorbike. Another time he crashed his truck, his father fixed it. Probably his father paid money to fix it and bought him a van for selling ice cream in the summer, giving him an opportunity to earn money. He did not care for his motorbike. Now, care for could mean take care of, like keep it oiled and keep it repaired, but I don't think it means that. I think it means he did not love his motorbike. He didn't like it. He didn't value it. These are possible meanings of cared for. And in this context, I think it means he did not value the motorbike. Also, he sold no ice cream. Again, he did not value the gift of a van for selling ice cream. He often expressed dissatisfaction with his father and their relationship. He is dissatisfied with the father and he is dissatisfied with his relationship to his father. But his dad was older and unwell. Older usually means older than what? But when it doesn't have that second half, older than someone, it just means relatively old. Not super old, but a little older than most dads. And unwell. So his father was older and unwell. Diagnosed with an illness only after many years. The function of this word only means he had the illness and he was not diagnosed for many years, and then finally, after many years, only then did they diagnose the illness. Probably it's too late to treat it very well. So only means it should have been diagnosed sooner, and this made it bad. He didn't have the energy he should have. That was the father. He didn't have much energy. Maybe he couldn't pay enough attention to his son. Maybe that's all it took to fracture their relationship. So these two maybes suggest that Jordan Peterson isn't sure why Chris was so angry and so dissatisfied and so rejecting of his father's obvious interest and love, fixing his truck and giving him gifts, and the boy didn't receive love from that. Chris had a cousin, Ed, who was about 2 years younger than Chris. I liked him as much as you can like. This would be the intonation of reading it. As much as you can like the younger cousin of a teenage friend. He was a tall, smart, charming, good-looking kid. He was witty, too. Witty means he said funny, smart things. Used language well. You would have predicted a good future for him had you met him when he was 12 years old. As a child, he looked like he would have a good future. But Ed drifted slowly downhill into a dropout, semi-drifting mode of existence. So we have drifted twice here. Ed drifted. The word drift means to move by maybe being blown by the wind. Move without intention, just because you are going downstream or some natural force is moving you and you are not in charge. So Ed drifted. He did not move purposefully, but he drifted slowly downhill. If you are going downhill, it doesn't mean literally downhill. It means your situation is getting worse. Your character is getting worse. Your health is getting worse. You're going downhill. He drifted slowly downhill into a dropout, semi-drifting mode of existence. So a dropout mode of existence and a semi-drifting mode of existence. Dropout means he just doesn't join the group. He doesn't show up when it's time to do something. And then semi-drifting means he does what he is required to do, but no more. He didn't get as angry as Chris, so the cousin wasn't as angry, but he was just as confused. He was confused. If you knew Ed's friends, you might say it was peer pressure that set him on his downward path. I underline his because this use of his is making a distinction from Chris's downward path. Chris went downhill for one reason. Ed went downhill maybe for a different reason. So you would say it was peer pressure, maybe, that caused Ed to go down. But his peers weren't obviously any more lost or delinquent than he was. So you would be wrong. His peers weren't the problem, although they were generally less bright. So his peers were sort of not smart, but they weren't, they weren't angry or resentful or drifting. It was also the case, meaning it was true, that Ed's and Chris's situation did not appear improved by their discovery of marijuana. So starting to smoke marijuana did not help. Marijuana isn't bad for everyone any more than alcohol is bad for everyone. Sometimes it appears to improve people, but it didn't improve Ed or Chris either. So marijuana made it even worse for these boys. To amuse ourselves in the long nights, Chris and I and Ed, usually we say Chris and Ed and I. Usually you put I last. The fact that he did not, he said Chris and I and Ed, indicates that Ed was a joiner in after the fact, not important, backseat. Really, it was Chris and I did this, and Ed came along. He was a kid. Chris and I and Ed, and the rest of the teenagers, drove around and around in our 1970s cars and pickup trucks. We cruised. This word cruised means drive aimlessly up and down. It's a little bit like the word pace for walking. If you are pacing, you are just walking up and down just for the sake of walking. Cruising is the same when you do it in a car, generally along a street, where you're honking your horn at girls and laughing, maybe drinking and throwing your bottles out the window. That's teenagers cruising around. Along Railroad Avenue, up past the high school, around the north end of town, over to the west, or up Main Street around the north end, over to the east. So they could go around town one way or around the other way. It didn't matter. Endlessly repeating the theme. If we weren't driving in town, we were driving in the country. A century earlier, surveyors had laid out a vast grid. A grid is this, of streets, west to east and north to south. Over the entire 300,000 square mile expanse of the Great Western Prairie. Every 2 miles north, so it'd be 2 miles here, a plowed gravel road stretched forever east to west. Every mile west, so this would be 1 mile, another road traveled north and south. We never ran out of roads. Run out is a 2-word verb, meaning I don't have any more. I've used them all up. Use up. Ran out. They never ran out of roads because they had endless roads east to west, endless roads north to south. Okay, that pretty much gives you a picture of the circumstance that Jordan Peterson lived in when he was a teenager. Next week, we will talk about what he did with his time in that wasteland of a desert prairie town. See you then.